Very good. Good afternoon, everyone. This conversation could not be more both timely in the context of what is happening in the world and relevant in the context of what we've just heard. I'm going to just talk to you very briefly about the decentralized identity disruption, which people have been thinking about for a long time, but is coming now. We'll talk about the role of biometrics, which in fact is going to be more and more central to this whole topic, and which may be unfamiliar to many of you. I'd like to give you a glimpse of what is happening out there amongst the criminals and the national security attackers, the real threats in this area. And we'll close off just by saying, what does this mean for all of us? Now, we've been talking about decentralized identity for quite some time. It was, as MEF, we've been interested in consumer trust and control over data. And over the last 10 years, we've talked about personal data stores, all that kind of stuff, and it never happened. But now a big change from the past is happening. Up until now, data has been all about centralized data stores, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. And what we're seeing is now the beginning of a very rapid change towards personal data stores, towards a world in which the facts about people, which include their identity, things, names, addresses, dates of birth, maybe other qualifications, instead of being stored in some enormous electronic filing cabinet, each person has their own data in their own folder, stored under their own control, maybe but not always, in their own personal mobile phone. This is, as it comes from being theoretical to practical, obviously, as you would expect, there's going to be a standards war. What transition would not have such a thing? There are two major standards here, the W3C verifiable credentials and the ISO 18013 mobile driving license standards. You'll hear about these more and more, so it's just useful to have that context so that when one of your team mentions it to you, go, oh yes, I know what those are. They have different characteristics. They are today very different, but they are converging. What is really going to make this transition move first and fastest is the European Digital Identity Wallet, under the regulations known as EIDAS2. And that law is going to come out of Brussels and into the real world in the next few weeks. So that will become law. It will become a regulation. It will start to change Europe in the next few weeks. And they've incorporated both standards. Apple and Google support mobile driving licenses, but they don't support verifiable credentials. So if you live in Maryland or Iowa or a number of other little states today, you can get a mobile driving license, but you can't get a verifiable credential. Those lucky souls who live in California, which after all is the largest and most prosperous state in the United States, on the other hand, can now get a verifiable credential, but not yet a mobile driving license. The Department of Homeland Security in the United States recently put out a call for tender to issue citizenship and other sorts of documents as verifiable credentials, but there is a tremendous move towards mobile driving licenses. For those of you who've been in the telco space for a long time, you will kind of recognize this, and it's just important as you think about this whole area that you know that you're going to have to manage this stuff, which is a little bit, there is power behind all of these. Apple has a lot of power over mobile driving licenses, and it has no power whatsoever over verifiable credentials, because in fact, these debates are not about technology at all. They're about commercial power in the ecosystem. Why is this change taking place at all? Once we step back from all of this detail, why is this change going to happen? And the answer is, decentralized identities are far more scalable than traditional models. If you need to provide an entire population with identity, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people, you can do it much more scalably without violating people's privacy. So they're much more private. The idea that everybody controls their own data rather than it being in the control of big tech is, as we saw from the previous presentation, very enticing to huge numbers of people. And finally, it's very secure. We tend to think about privacy as being protection of people's personal data against their own governments, against surveillance. But actually, the threats today don't come typically from people's own governments. They come from hostile governments. And as identity becomes critical national infrastructure for more and more places, So the protection of that critical national infrastructure against adversaries who are state actors becomes more and more critical, and these systems, because they're decentralized and because of the way that they're constructed, are far more secure, so they provide national resilience. That's a big deal if you're a national government, and it explains, it's one reason why we're seeing an accelerating trend towards this kind of identity. But there are a number of challenges. We'll talk about them in a second. It's a change. Why change? There are issues of governance. How does trust flow backwards and forwards across an ecosystem which is distributed? And how does the money flow? What are the commercial models? Let's have a look at those briefly. Firstly, just a quick primer on how identity works today. Today, there is the role of what is known as an identity provider, an IDP. The IDP has what you might consider an electronic filing cabinet containing all the information about the people involved. And when a relying party, that is, might be a financial institution like a bank, it might be a content provider, it might be a communications provider, when that organization wants to know who they're dealing with or wants confirmation of who they're dealing with, then they use a protocol typically like OIDP or the older SAML, and they make an inquiry. They go, who is this? And the IDP replies, well, this is Andrew Budd. And in order to find that out, the IDP takes responsibility for checking that it's Andrew Budd. It uses its own established systems and its own established methods to provide a level of assurance, as it's called, that they are highly confident. And the relying party knows about that level of assurance because it's part of the contract that they have with the IDP, and very often they pay the IDP money. So there's a clear flow of money, there's a clear flow of trust, there's a clear flow of information. These OIDC integrations are done. Many of you will have such integrations. The trust models are settled, the business, this kind of works. There are millions and millions of relying parties across the whole economy who work this way. And all of that's going to blow up because in the world of decentralized identity, it's all different. Let's talk about let's talk first about the investments that the relying parties are going to have to make. The way relying parties will no longer interact with nice corporate organizations, with nice enterprises like IDPs. They're going to have to interact with people's own wallets. Well, the protocols are there, the mechanisms are, well, they're actually not there, but let's pretend that they are there. And when they are there, then everybody in the economy is going to have to make some significant investment changes in order to interact on that right-hand side with using this brand new protocol. And that's going to mean significant investment. All of you are going to have to make significant investments in order to do exactly what you're doing at the moment. And what's the problem with that? So there is a big transition issue because this brand new protocol means that there's going to have to be a change which appears to deliver no immediate benefit. In terms of payments, business model, the way that this whole architecture was designed by people whose fundamental concern was civil liberties and privacy, and they wanted to make sure that no information could flow, that it could flow beyond what was absolutely necessary, and they overdid it. With the result that it's extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible, to create CDRs, to create billing records. So there's no mechanism in here, and in fact there are mechanisms in here that impede any possible payment flowing from those who get value, the relying parties, to those who created value, which are the credential issuers. Well, in the Mobile Ecosystem Forum, we know that business models and money, far more than protocols, actually are what drive business behavior. And if there's no money, then there's no business behavior. So there is a huge issue here, which, shall we say, people are talking about in the corridors of for example, the IDAS environment and the various test programs that are going on, one of which we're involved in, which is called NoBid, which is experimenting with the way in which the European Digital Identity Wallet is going to work with payments, and we're kind of going, this is all very well, but how is money going to flow? How is this whole thing going to work? So there's a huge problem that there's no business model. And the third challenge is trust models. So this architecture that you see here is how it's all going to work, and it is going to work this way. You're going to have people who create the bits of information, organizations that create the bits of information, they're called credential issuers, and the user is going to have to authenticate themselves to the credential issuer to show that they are the correct owner of that credential, and please would they pass it on to the identity wallet. And how convinced, how secure is the credential issuer going to make that process? And so in other words, how reliable is that credential when it gets shipped over? So this process of authentication for issuance has to reach some sort of standardized level of assurance. And for reasons that I'll talk about in a minute, you as the user can control, and you can dispense information from it as and when you choose, and nobody else has any possible control over it. But clearly, every time you use it, you have to prove that you are the rightful owner of that information. The relying party has to know that you are the rightful owner of that information, so you're going to have to authenticate to your wallet. How does the relying party know that you didn't kind of give your own wallet the name of your grandmother's maiden name, or a password that has been pawned 66 times already? So what is the level of assurance with which you authenticate to your own wallet that the relying party has to trust? And so by decentralizing everything, you've created an ecosystem of trust which needs to be defined. And in many cases, it isn't defined. In the European digital identity wallet, it is defined. But there's a huge fight going on right now in the standards body over what these levels of assurance mean, and above all, what the conditions are for cloud biometrics. Why do biometrics matter? Because in a decentralized identity world, what you're dealing with is folders of facts about people. But you don't transact with folders of facts. You don't accept money from folders of facts. You don't have to take legal action against folders of facts or get sued by folders of facts. These things happen with real people. So in this decentralized world, it's really, really important how these decentralized identity credential sets get bound to real live human beings. Because at some point you have to make the jump off the mobile phone and into person space. You have to link to the wetware. And that is the failure point. So there are 3 reasons, and there's a lot of people kind of go, well, I've got the biometric, I've got Face ID on my phone, I've got my Android face recognition, that's surely biometrics. No, not in this coming world. In this coming world, it's going to have to be biometrics that run in the cloud. This is a very unfamiliar idea, but I can tell you that it's gaining altitude extremely quickly. Why? Because in many cases, these decentralized identity schemes only work if you have massive ubiquity. Look, the reason that SMS was such a success, when really, speaking as the founder of one of the early SMS companies, there was a lot wrong with it, is because its endpoints were ubiquitous. Every phone on the planet could send and receive SMSs. And that's what made it the ubiquity of use is what made it so powerful. If you run biometrics on the device, some people can have good ones, some people have bad ones. It's a mess. Cloud-based biometrics means that everybody on the planet, at least with a smartphone, can use biometrics, and that gives it that same sense of universality. Aren't. But secondly, device-based biometrics don't deliver strong liveness. Who cares? We hear a lot about biometrics being a bit of a dodgy thing because, after all, you can reset your password, but you can't reset your face if it gets stolen. Nobody can steal my face, except with a scalpel and a lot of blood. Your face is, on the one hand, a public document, and on the other hand, you can't steal it because it's glued, it's fixed to the front of your skull. So the value of a face as a way of binding to a person doesn't come from the fact that a face is secret. And the more you kind of roll that around in your head, the more ridiculous that sentence sounds. It's because the genuine article is unique. And therefore, the use of biometrics absolutely requires the ability to ensure that you're looking at a real face and not a copy of one. The threat to biometrics is not theft, it's successful use of copies. And therefore, biometrics, in order to be worth anything, have to have really good defense against copies. And that's what liveness is. And today, it's becoming easier and 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 easier, and it's happening fast, to make ever better copies. And I'm going to talk to you in a minute about that, because it's really scary. And if you put the liveness detection on the handset, all you've done is to give the attacker the tool that you've used to defend yourself against them. And it'll take them a few hours to figure out how to get around it, and then it's done. Only if the fraud defense, because that's what it is, the fraud defense is actually in the cloud, can you prevent the attacker from experimenting on it in an unlimited, unobserved way. So cloud biometrics have to be cloud biometrics because the liveness, which is the core of its security, has to be kept out of the hands of the attacker. And the third is, it can't stand still. It can't stand still. If we were just talking about masks, and until a few years ago, everybody used to talk to us about masks. Sorry, when I say us, I mean iProov. We're the world's leading provider of strong liveness and biometric matching. They'd talk to us about masks, and we'd say, you're worrying about the wrong things. Worry about deepfakes. Well, now everybody's worrying about deepfakes. And the reason is that deepfakes move extremely fast. We'll talk about this in just a second. If the technology is in the cloud, then the technology can move faster than the attackers. You can watch the attackers, you can study them, you can learn from them, and you can change. It's a little bit, if you want to think about it, like antivirus. How many of you, hands up those of you who are very happy to have an antivirus system installed on your PC, remember PCs? Who had an antivirus system installed in PCs, which was never updated. Completely ridiculous. That's why liveness has to be run in the cloud. What is it up against? So I'm going to just take you through a few slides, 2 or 3, that are drawn from the findings of the 2024 iProov Threat Intelligence Report, which goes really deeply into an analysis of the real-world activities of attackers. I'm not going to talk you through this thing. You can breathe a sigh of relief. This just gives you a sense for the taxonomy of how biometric systems used in decentralized identities are attacked, the different sorts of attacks, the different routes through to a successful spoof, and therefore through to the compromise of a decentralized identity. And basically, I'm just going to talk about... I'm not going to talk about presentation attacks. That's masks, old stuff. We're going to talk about digital injection attacks, and we're going to talk about malicious payloads, and in particular synthetic media, and in particular deepfakes, and in particular face swaps. This is, shall we say, this is the big thing that is happening now. So we can tell you that face swaps are the attack of choice. So this is a video which our team put together using the cheapest, most widely available tools imaginable. The subject doesn't look like any of those. The subject is a lady who's our head of biometric defenses, and she doesn't look like any of those. These are various members of her team whose face has been swapped onto it. And I defy any of you, well, that's maybe a little bit odd, but I defy any of you to determine which of these are fakes and which are not. I mean, a human being cannot tell that these are fakes. The great thing about face swap technology is that the threat actor has total control over both the movements and the actions and the performance and the speaking of the person. And you can produce these things on an incredible scale. They are enormously cheap. In some cases, you can put, if you want to, you can put deepfake heads behind them so there is no human being. But otherwise, you can attack on a vast scale at incredibly low price. There's no human defense against this anymore. So what you're seeing here is what will kill video agent verification. In many territories, many of you will perhaps either have experienced it or be using it. The current way in which you bind a human being to an identity is by means of a video call. And you call up and you chat to them, and the agent asks you some questions, and maybe they ask you to hold up your document. And that is the gold standard today. And what you're looking at is the death of the video call. This thing is cheap, simple, and easy to inject. And it is a massive threat both to existing biometric systems and to video calling systems, and frankly also to Zoom. You'll have to ask, in future, you'll have to ask yourself, is this person that I think I'm talking to over Zoom who I think they are? Last year, we saw the incidence of these in the wild increase by 700%. And that was not from a particularly low base. 700% increase. There was an explosion in these types of attacks. 2 weeks ago, we saw a bank in South America attacked 35,000 times by these in the space of a week. That's what your clients, your customers, your partners are going to be up against quite soon. And the attackers are not alone. This has now become an industry. So what you're looking at here is our count of the number of threat groups that we've counted on the dark web who are involved in the exchange of information between themselves about how to attack these sorts of systems. And as you can see, half of them were born last year. So this is a very new phenomenon. They doubled in size just through 2023. I mean, look at that uptake. And each of these groups had over 1,000 members. So what's happening is this is becoming a large-scale, highly resourced, extremely fast-growing industry aimed at disrupting the point of binding between human beings and their identities, both at the point of creation and at the point of assertion. So to conclude, what does all this mean to us? Well, one way or another, this is going to happen. There's no doubt about this now. We can argue about how fast it'll happen. Will it be done in 2 years or 2.5 years, as the European Union thinks, or will it take 3 to 5 years? Or will it come even faster, given that in the United States we will see an explosion of the use of MDLs and verifiable credentials over the next year? And everybody will have these wallets, and in some cases they'll have potentially many wallets, and that's going to cause some confusion. And I'm afraid for those of you who pay a lot of your staff salaries over SMS OTP, I'm afraid this technology is going to replace SMS OTP. That as content and service providers, you will rely upon cryptographic assertions from people's wallets instead. Because more and more people will have those wallets, and they are so incomparably more reliable than the huge challenges which many of you will know SMS OTP is now recognized to have by content and service providers. If you want to know what the nemesis of SMS OTP looks like, it's beginning to look like this. The result is that people won't authenticate using OTP to the relying party. They will authenticate to their own wallets instead, but they won't use SMS OTP. For one thing, there's no economic model for it to do so. They will instead use biometrics. And those biometrics, SMS OTP has been heavily attacked. Biometrics will be even more heavily attacked. But there are ways of defending against them. Just as in SMS, we're going to see a mixture of actors out there, some who claim to do it, some who really do a good job, and some who be rapid change. There's going to be a need for systemic trust, and there's going to be a need for collaboration in the ecosystem. And the thing that has distinguished the Mobile Ecosystem Forum over all these years, over all these decades, is that we have contributed to the facilitation of rapid change, we have contributed to the facilitation of systemic trust, and we've contributed to the facilitation of collaboration across the ecosystem. And I think that for the MEF and its members, this is going to be another very important transition which will bring us all together in making it successful. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for a very fascinating presentation. We do have time for one or two questions, if there are any in the audience. Any questions? Andrew, I have one. In terms of your presentation, for listening to it, it's a little worrisome, especially when talking about biometric attacks, deepfakes. What are the defense possibilities there? How do you safeguard yourself?
So if you take the problem, the first thing is you take the problem seriously, because an enormous number of companies in this sector don't take it seriously. They kind of go, yeah, whatever is cheapest. Look, I care passionately about this because my company, iProov, has been protecting people and organizations against these sorts of sophisticated spoofs for 10 years. Last year, the head of government of a significant country ordered his people to run a penetration test against us because we were part of the critical national infrastructure of that country. A military penetration attacker organization spent 9 months trying to fool us using deepfakes and failed. Worldwide, we believe that in the last 12 months, despite this pressure, there have been more or less 0 successful attempts, considering that there have been over 1 million people verifying a day on some occasions. That is kind of very comforting. So it can be done. It can be done, and not just by us. There will be others who can do it. But organizations who take it seriously can be done because there is one major defense in the case of cloud biometrics. Every time an attacker attacks us, we learn more about their methods than they learn about us. So in a cloud-based biometric system, this is very different from what happens on a handset, but in a well-constructed cloud biometric system, there is an informational asymmetry. So because we can watch the attackers at work, we can study and learn from what they're doing, we can, with a fraction of their resources, stay ahead of them on an ongoing basis. If and only if you take that approach, then I'm confident that this is going to continue to provide a high level of security. The real threat will be complacency and slovenliness amongst both vendors and customers who don't take the threat seriously enough.
And what about just an average person? You and me, we don't have a huge profile. We don't have a lot of resources to invest in these types of technologies as a private citizen. What things can we do? Is there anything out there? Are there things that we should be looking for?
So I think that in Europe, we're going to be given, in the European Union, we will be given the European Digital Identity Wallet in a couple of years' time, and that will be subject to quite strong regulations. That will become an enormously powerful tool for all sorts of applications. In the UK, I think it's going to be a bit more complicated, but I think that once again, normally but not always, it's governments who provide these sorts of tools. The risk is that the big tech vendors, Apple and Google, try to pull us all into their orbit, and you saw earlier on how frightened people are of that. But because of their relative inexperience in this area, they don't understand what they're doing, and they make a large-scale mess of it. So I think that as a citizen, we should look for credible organizations who are willing to underwrite the trust of their digital identity wallet systems. If they're based upon these sorts of standards that we're seeing here, that provides enormous levels of trust and security which we can rely on. This is really not a message for citizens. The whole decentralized identity thing is not a message for citizens. It's been cast that way. Oh, your privacy. Most people actually don't care very much. This is not a message. It's a tool for citizens, but it's a message for enterprises and organizations who have to make this ecosystem work, because it will produce much higher levels of security, much better resilience, much lower risk, much better scalability. It'll reduce everybody's exposure to fraud and to fraud risk and to the criticism that they have been complacent or slovenly about their users' identities. So it'll make the whole ecosystem safer and better, but we're all going to have to play our part in helping that transition to a better world.
And with that, thank you, Andrew, very much for a really, really intriguing presentation.